Hello. Thanks for joining me on the nondescript gray couch here at Fort Polk, Louisiana. I'm Colonel John Ives. You can contact me via my information down here at the bottom of the screen. I am India 6, the Senior Intelligence Officer, Senior Observer, Coach, and Trainer at JRTC. Today we'll be talking about the next bullet, which is establishing and maintaining the intelligence architecture. Specifically, we'll be talking about planning, validating, and rehearsing by phase, collector, and capability. So again, a little bit of a mouthful, but if I were to paraphrase this one as well, I would say communicate and practice communicating. The first topic is going to be, of course, everybody's favorite, D6A. Yes, it works. Get it stood up. Make it work for you. Find all the tools that are available in it. Find all the access that you have and get connected. Here at JRTC, the reason it's so important is one, when you show up on R6, which is during RSOI week, on R6, we're going to say, okay, the system is on. At this point, the data starts flowing. You're going to start with somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 1,500 entities waiting for you when you plug in and connect to our server stack. So if you don't get plugged in by R6, R7, R9, T1, then you're missing out on a lot of data because we start off with 1,200 and then the reporting starts flowing from there. So if you wait a day, you could be 1,800 entities behind, you could be 2,000 entities behind by the time you get into the box. So you have to show up already knowing what it is you need to do to get your D6 stood up. Plus, during the rotation, the entities continue to flow. Like I said, that's how you get your information from division, is through the D6A architecture. So if you're not connected, you run the risk of only getting chat communication, or if and when you get your phone stood up, you might get that one. The other architecture you want to make sure you stand up is anything that gives you access to the CSG from your CST, for example. We have a lot of data flowing on the higher side that you want to make sure you have access to. When you don't get that capability stood up as well, you run the risk of missing out on a lot of good information that'll help you out. And if nothing else, you really want to kind of have some sort of connectivity to the EAB assets that are collecting for you, whether they be live or virtual. There are going to be capabilities out there, and if you're not connected to these networks, if your architecture isn't stood up, then you're not going to have that data flowing in down to the BCT level. So why do I say plan, validate, and rehearse? Well, obviously you want to do that with everything, but let me tell you a story. A brigade came through here and they were having a real hard time communicating with their battalions. And so at one point or another, we finally just pulled them aside and said, hey, take a look at your PACE plan, because that's really what's holding you back right now. Your primary, your alternate, your contingency, your emergency, they aren't working. They aren't matching what it is you need. And they got very irate and said, the BCT PACE plan is fine. It's the battalions that aren't cooperating. So before you come to JRTC, before you go to your first exercise at home station, take a look at what capabilities are actually there. Take a look at what's inside the battalion and inside the brigade. And don't forget those other battalions like the BSB, the BEB, your aviation battalion. They have different capabilities than just your maneuver battalions. And if you aren't taking into account what those battalions have to offer, you're missing out on a lot of intelligence. You're missing out on the opportunity to make sure that everybody has a clear understanding of what's going on. And I'm pretty sure that's called an intelligence common operational picture, or what we commonly call the common intelligence picture. So you have to take into account what everybody has. Let me give you an example. A lot of organizations say that the A or the C of their PACE plan is JBCP or a chat function through another means. Take a look at what the battalions actually have. A lot of them will say, yes, I have access to JBCP. But when it comes down to it, what they have is one system that they're sharing with the S3. Now, no matter what system you have, if you put the S3 trying to run operations and the S2 trying to run intelligence right next to each other using the exact same radio, chat, computer, whatever, the S3 will win every time. Every time. This has happened my entire career, where you say, hey, I need an Intel net. We used to call it the O&I net that we would stand up on FM. And when it came down to retrans, the S6 would then prioritize ops and the logistics nets and the fires nets long before they would ever prioritize the O&I. So you ran on the risk of, I have no way of communicating beyond my little 10 or 15 kilometer range because I don't have priority. That hasn't changed. The S2s very rarely get the priority on JDCP or any other chat if they're sharing with fires and ops. So keep that in mind when you ask the question of, do you have this capability? It's not just if you have the capability, do you have primary access to that capability in order to communicate? When you are planning, validating, and rehearsing your pace, think about your pace in a matter of it has to be on multiple networks, on multiple systems. Now, what do I mean by that? Imagine if my wife and I were looking at an emergency situation and I said, okay, if something happens, an earthquake or another tornado in Louisiana, I were to say, okay, the primary is going to be, I'm going to text you on your cell phone. The alternate is I'm going to call you on the cell phone. The contingency is we'll use the WhatsApp on the cell phone. And the emergency is I will FaceTime you using the cell phone. Now, obviously we've set ourselves into a trap that if the cell networks go down, nothing's working. So this is what a lot of organizations do, though. They say, hey, we're going to use, this system, this system, this system, and they all seem to run the same backbone of what the S6 has established. Or they try to run off of, everything is off of D6A. You have to have primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency on different networks, different systems. So why by phase? Well, at one point or another, you're going to be moving or you're going to be jumping. So during the first phase of your operation, you may just be setting up the defense. And then about 6 or 12 hours later, the commander is going to say, okay, now this is the part where we jump the main command post, or this is the part where we split the TAC and the TOC. Well, that's a different phase of the operation. And so if you haven't rehearsed, what does our architecture look like when all of a sudden the TAC is here? The main command post is jumping and our distributed BICE or rear BICE or whatever crazy idea you've got is established in a different location. What does that look like? And then what happens when the MCP and the TAC come back together? What does it look like if the BICE decides to jump while the main command post has the fight? Does that change the intel architecture? Different phases mean different things. The recon phase, the when we're in contact phase, the consolidation phase. All of these parts have different communication requirements and different capabilities that are available because of the situation. So why do we want to do it by collector? JSTARS, EMARS, Shadow, your human collection team, or whatever else you have out there in the battlefield, they all have different ways of communicating. And so understanding what it is they require is important. Remember we talked about the 4 core competencies of PED being one of them and synchronization being another. This is where those kind of come together. If your collector can't talk to the person who's doing the PED and your PED person can't actually communicate that to anybody, then you're missing out on a big part of your intel architecture. The third one, you want to plan, validate, and rehearse by capability. Now, that sounds like it bleeds right into the collector piece, and it does. But let's take GEOINT, for example. You have a GEOINT capability. If you don't plan, validate, and rehearse how GEOINT is going to do its job, then you're missing out. So for example, you've got the GBS, OSRVT, Movement Client. Like what other means do you have to get either still imagery or full motion video or dots to your GEOINT analysts for them to do their jobs? If you don't walk through all of those, then you miss out as well. So that's why I say if you do it by phase, by collector, and by capability, then you kind of hit all the different edges of what it is you need to be thinking about when it comes to your intelligence architecture. So all of this is not just your problem, S2. Take a look at what the S6 is trying to do. The S6 may do something like, well, we can't really have all of our server stacks here, so I'm putting them all at this location. And if nobody's paying attention to when the S6 is jumping, then you're missing out on a lot of your capability as well. So you have to be tied into them. Also understanding when the main command post is jumping, when the TAC is splitting off, whether or not you have to jump the BICE. All of these things, you have to be in tune with the operation. You have to be in tune with the blue plan. You have to be in tune with what the S6 is doing. So it's not just US too. When I say establishing your Intel architecture is very much dependent on what the whole rest of the BCT is doing. So, okay, that concludes today's episode, but I'd like to answer a few of the questions that I've been receiving. The first one being, is this like a John Krasinski thing? No, I am actually wearing my pants. They was asked if I could do this between two ferns like Zach Galifianakis, and no, I don't actually have any ferns in my house at this moment. And of course, the last question, which I think was the most humorous one, was when are you going to actually tell us some secrets of how to win in JRTC? I don't know. Maybe the next episode.